Today, as we continue on with our biome ecosystem series, we're going to be talking about estuaries and enclosed sea systems, and the who, what, when, where, why, and how this information can better help us to grow plants. Let's get started. Different biomes are going to be made up of different ecosystems all throughout the world, based on the latitude, longitude, and how close or far away they are to the oceans. All of these different factors will help to determine how much precipitation, rainfall, the temperatures, all of the factors that are important for the different types of plants that they can grow within an area. There are specific biomes that are going to be much more dominant than others. Those that are going to be much closer to the equator that receive much more land. The reason why these are so dominant is because this has the largest landmass area around the equator, where much more of the water is. And so by having increasing dryness, increasing temperatures, that will dictate how the pyramid of ecosystems are stacked of what the most biology or the largest area that you're going to deal with versus the least amount. And that's kind of pictured by this pyramid. When you look at estuaries and enclosed sea systems at first, generally they're going to be located at the end of river systems, with alluvial silt sands and sand deposits. The reason why this is so predominant is simply because as the river runs down, it's going to be picking up smaller particles like the sand, the silt, and drive them down, and then it's going to deposit them at the bay of where the sea and the river meet. Typically much where the smaller particles are. The bigger particles, where you see the river rocks, are going to be much heavier, and so it's much harder for the river to be able to drag that down. In all cases, the river water is going to be fresh water, whether the source is going to be from glacier melt, rainwater, or just seeping through the ground level. It's all going to be fresh water. And then as it collects towards the sea, it then becomes sea water or brackish water in the mix between the two, where the fresh water and the salt water actually mix together. When you look at what the temperature of these estuaries are of, it is going to vary dramatically based on where they are located throughout the world. If you're looking at the estuaries of the Nile going more towards Cairo, they're going to be much higher in temperature. If you're looking at those of either coming off of Russia or the high North American continent, they are going to be much colder. So the temperature where these are located are going to vary greatly. Quite often, though, you can expect them to be a little bit cooler than their surrounding areas, just because that water is going to cause what's called a microclimate effect to help climatize the areas to be much milder. Quite frequently as well, they are also going to be much more humid than potentially the greater surrounding areas are. With that, in looking at the precipitation, many of these estuaries, the precipitation is going to vary just as much as the surrounding areas, because they are located all throughout the world. Those that are more based towards the equator are going to be more water and have a lot of their rain more towards the summertime. If it is going to be a little bit cooler, then often the case that's going to come in the form of snow, just because of how cold it is, off of similar to the glacier melts. Quite frequently, though, with a lot of the swings throughout the entire world, much of this is going to be in the form of winter rains, just as the patterns shift with the high and low periods. Most of that's going to take place during the winter months. However, that also can vary based on region. When you're looking a lot at the soil types of what takes place within these areas, most estuaries and enclosed seas are going to be just as varied as the location. those estuaries or seas like the Nile mentioned before is going to be a much higher pH just based off of the lower rainfall. There you're going to have much higher calcareous soils, and so that river water is going to seep up those higher nutrients, and it's going to be affected in the pH. Just like those of colder climates are going to have much higher rainfall or are going to be higher in clay or other forms, and so it really does depend on the individual seas and the estuaries where they're located at. The only thing that is going to be consistent across the entire board is the tendency to have a great deal amount of silt and sand clay that is going to be in these that is carried off from the water. When you take a look at the type of vegetation that's located in these areas, they can be varied just as much as the location. In the sandy areas, the high deserts, you're going to see much greater grasses and smaller annuals that can handle the extreme heat. They have very short growing times, whereas in other areas that are a little bit more colder, you're going to tend to find conifer, evergreens, or in the estuaries of the Mississippi Delta, you're going to find a great deal of cypress trees that can handle a lot of that area. Most often with these cases, though, you are going to find plants that can handle low oxygen environments for the water due to the nature that you are going to have an extremely large amount of water. For the animals that you deal with in these areas, the source material can be very different as much as the river systems. If you're dealing with the Nile area, going back to that, you're going to have a lot more crocodiles, reptiles, based off it being in a desert, low moisture environment. Whereas in the more northern climates, you're most often going to see large mammals such as the grizzly bear, black bear, deer, elk, coyote, wolf, those type of creatures. In many cases, though, you will find a great amount of animals that will feed off of the food sources within that river system, such as shown the grizzly bear is eating salmon or vice versa, or the land animals will frequently use the river as a source for their material. When you look at alluvial plains, though, they do have some very great effects. With estuaries and enclosed seas, they are often the collection points for a great excess amount of material, the lowest point within the geographical area, and so not only due to gravity, but also the river system collects it. And because they are so potentially sensitive, all of the excess nutrients that is in that farmland is going to come off in the form of runoff. And so that is why often these areas tend to be the locations of major environmental disasters due to these low land collection points. Whether it be to the overuse of pesticides, nutrients, whether they're phosphates or nitrates that are in the soil, they do tend to collecting these areas, creating dead zones. And these dead zones can have great biological diverse effects on the land, from total devastation to being able to kind of deal with it and coming back from it. However, that can be a source of potentially biologically damaging areas, and so that's why these are so important in this particular ecosystem to understand what it is, why it's so sensitive, because they can be very damaged. And that's why I personally find it to be one of the most important ecosystems to understand, just due to the potential dangers that it can have in destroying these areas. I would like to thank you for joining us this video as we take a look at seeing inlet seas and estuaries and looking at this cursory glance of why it's so important to understanding this particular ecosystem. I would like to thank you for joining us this video and to look forward to seeing you next time. And now, here's a word from our sponsors. This episode of Yule Acres is brought to you by Yule Acres Grapefruit Naturally Scented Lip Balm. For more information about this product, click on the link in the description below.